Okay, good morning. Can you hear me? And if so, welcome. I think we can go ahead and get started. It's 10:01, and thank you everyone for attending today. My name is Georgia Peterson, and I'm a Natural Resources Extension Specialist with Michigan State University Extension. And I really appreciate everybody taking their time today to talk about something a little bit different. This is part of MSU Extensions and Ag Bio Research's efforts at reaching out to people using a virtual field day format for the year. And in the past, we had features on different kinds of crops and so on. And this one's going to be a little bit different in that it's going to be about forests and forestry. So really appreciate your joining us. This is a webinar, so it'll be presentation format, but we will give you an opportunity to ask questions using the question and answer option. So at any time, at the top of your screen, I believe, there's an option, or the bottom, sorry, Renee, I think it's the bottom of the screen. Anyway, there's a Q&A function. You can press that button and ask questions, and we will stop occasionally during the course of this presentation to hope be able to address those questions if possible. We will be recording this as well, and so later on, if you want to take a look at it later, you'll have that opportunity as well. So don't worry if you miss out on something, a concept or something, you can come back to it later. I really appreciate it. So let's go ahead and get started. We have a couple of guest speakers, not just myself. Again, I'm Dr. Georgia Peterson with MSU Extension. We also have Nia Becker, who is a Forestry Assistance Program Forester with the Clare Gladwin County Conservation District. And she's got a lot of good experience being out in the woods and working with landowners. We also will be talking about invasive species issues, and we have two great speakers that are going to be talking about that. That's Katie Grishak and Vicky Sawicki, and they're both invasive species coordinators in the Northern Lower. And so they will be featuring several things that you can do if you encounter those invasive species after a harvest. So just to give you an overview of what we'll be talking about today, first, I just wanted to give you a brief overview of how important private forest ownerships are in Michigan. And if you are one of those kinds of people, how do you get started if you want to think about a harvest? And what's in a forest management plan? Although we won't be able to have enough time to actually talk about how the harvest takes place, we can talk about what you might expect after a harvest and what you would expect to see when it's done properly. And what to think about post-harvest. And that's where we can talk about what I consider to be one of the most concerning issues, and that's exotic invasive species. And yeah, and there we go. So like I said, if you have any questions throughout this, feel free to place those questions in the question and answers box or chat box, and we'll be able to get to those occasionally throughout the course of the presentation. Okay. Great, so let's get started. And like I said, I wanted to just give a brief overview of how important family forest owners are. And let me just stop for a moment and ask Renee, who's my faithful assistant, to pull up a couple of polls to ask you a little bit about your own experience. So first one, I just wanted to get started with something fun and ask what you enjoy most about autumn in Michigan. So is it picking or eating apples, going hunting, enjoying the fall colors, watching football, such as it is, wearing flannel, celebrating Halloween, or getting closer to the end of 2020? So feel free to pick one of those that you enjoy most about autumn in Michigan. And then when you've picked one, you can click on submit. And Renee, you can decide when it's time to move on and show results or go to the next question, whatever. Yay. Okay, so that's pretty good. Most of you, or over half of you, said enjoying the fall colors, and they certainly are at their best, at least in the Lower Peninsula, maybe a little past that in the Upper Peninsula. Okay, I think we had one more poll, and this is to help me get to know who is out there watching us today, because I don't really have a chance to see your faces, and that's unfortunate, to be able to ask these sorts of things directly. But I just wanted to know if you have a forest of your own that's at least 5 acres, okay? Do you have this forest as part of your farm, or as part of your residence, or perhaps you have a piece of forested property up north or somewhere else that you visit occasionally, and you can choose more than one if you have more than one of these answers. And or no, you don't own a forest, which, you know, that's fine too, of course. I'll just give it a few seconds. Okay. Oh, great. Okay. So 40% of you said that you have a woodlot or a forest as part of your farm. That's great. 15% as part of your residence. 13% have forested property elsewhere. And we do have 35% that don't own a forest and are just listening to this. And I think that's great too. So, you know, I have a friend with the Michigan Forest Association that likes to say that everybody is a forest owner, because even if you don't own land yourself, you might have a friend that you can visit or that has land, or we have lots of public lands that really belong to you because you help to support them. So that's what I wanted to be able to show in this slide here, which is how important those family forest owners are in relation to overall forest land in Michigan in particular. So we have about 19 million acres of forested land in Michigan. That's about half of the land in Michigan. And 45% of that is owned by private family forest owners. And when I say family forest owners, it basically just distinguishes between private owners that are non-commercial, that don't own land specifically for selling timber or other products. Okay. So that's a big proportion of the forested land in Michigan. And then I have a cute little quiz. All right, you can just answer this on your own, not a poll or anything. So I can get this to work. There we go. So just as to get you thinking about this, over the past several decades, would you say that the number of forest landowners the actual number of forest landowners, family forest owners in Michigan has decreased or increased? So think about that, and I will give you the answer in the next slide, which is that actually the number of forest landowners, according to the National Woodland Owner Survey that's put together by the Forest Service and conducted on an occasional basis every 5 to 10 years. Let me back up. Says that there are about 192,000 ownerships in Michigan alone, and that's for ownerships of land that is at least 10 acres. Okay, so that's quite a few number of people that own forested land, and that continues to increase the number of owners themselves. The other thing that I get you to think about a little bit is over the past several decades, would you say that the average parcel size that people own has decreased or increased? So think about that one for a second. And overall, the average parcel size has been decreasing over the years. So 78,000 of those family forest owners own between 10 and 19 acres. And I will say that there are lots more people that own 1 or 5 to 10 acres, or a lot more than that even. So I mean, the actual parcel size keeps decreasing, and that's often because you have inheritance or other ways that the land gets split to different heirs and so on. So we have a lot of small ownerships, but regardless of that, the other thing that the National Woodland Owners Survey asks is why family forest owners own their property overall. And and people can choose more than one of these options, but the top 5 reasons for owning forest land is not about timber. It's about protecting or improving wildlife habitat, to enjoy beauty or scenery, for privacy, to protect nature or biological diversity, or for hunting. So it's mostly about wildlife and just those ecological values, not necessarily about harvesting timber. That said, selling timber is part a lot of times of forest ownership. About 20% of the people that answered this question about reasons for owning did say that they own it to harvest timber. And even those that place those other values higher might end up choosing to want to harvest at some point or another for different reasons. So that's why this is still important, even if it's not the primary reason for owning their land. And so what the biggest concern is, a lot of times when people think about this, is they don't consider it because they're afraid of the damage that the potential damage that might take place on their forested land after the harvest. They feel like that might create some sort of permanent harm. Others may be approached by a timber buyer, though, and I will say unscrupulous timber buyer, and offered some lump sum, knock on the door, hey, I'll give you $5,000 for all of your trees that are 12 inches in diameter and larger. That on the surface, some people might think that that's a good deal, but that is not a good way of managing your land. It's called diameter limited cut or high grading. That is not a good way of managing your land, and often without proper bidding and proper care, that's often a ripoff as well, that the landowner is not getting the actual value for the timber that gets removed. So it is a concern, it is something to think about, but it can be approached responsibly and in ways that allow you to be able to continue having the forest for the values that you want. And that's where we get to that first question. Before you think about any sort of harvesting, it's really important to clarify what your own personal goals are for your land. Okay, so what do you value about your forest land? Is it that you like to use it for hunting, or just bird watching, or just enjoying the fall colors, or whatever? Think about that and articulate it well. And you can answer other sorts of questions about the property. Are there special features that you consider unique? Do you have a stream or pond that you like to be able to enjoy or use? Are there certain kinds of wildlife that you want to be able to see more often? Are there cultural features, historical features, things, special trees that your grandparents planted perhaps that you want to be able to maintain or enjoy? All those sorts of things, and is it important for you to pass the land on to your heirs? And so all of these sorts of things you can think about as part of your goals for your property before even thinking about any sort of harvest, because the next question is, well, what do you do next? And I have a video that I'm going to ask Renee to pull up that features a family that owns some land and what they consider to be the important first step when once you know what your goals are.
We've heard a lot of horror stories where people have gone with just anybody that walks up to them, and basically they get robbed because these people take the good trees instead of improving the forest, and people lose a lot of money.
Richard and Karen Surfass made the decision to start actively managing their forests over 20 years ago. They began by talking to friends and neighbors who were managing their woodlots. After a lot of thought, they decided to hire a forester.
Using a forester is a definite plus because they've got the knowledge and they can guide you through the whole process. So I wouldn't go without a professional forester myself.
Richard and Karen were so happy with the results of their first timber harvest, they decided to do another 10 years later and are still actively managing their forests today. They say the key to their success was hiring a forester. But what does a forester do? A forester is a forest expert who works for you. He or she begins by meeting you on your property and inventorying your trees. Next, your forester helps you put together a forest management plan.
One of the things that a forest management plan will do is help you understand what you're managing toward in the future. So not only what is harvestable today, what can I harvest and sell, but what needs to be done to culture my forest into a higher value woodlot in the future. And in addition to that, what am I doing for wildlife habitat? What am I doing to protect all the other resources that are there? Those are the elements that get dealt with in a forest management plan.
Perfect. Thank you, Renee. Yeah, so to follow up on that a little bit, we're going to ask Nia to step in and talk about sort of review what it is that you just saw.
Yeah, hi. So my name is Nia Becker. I'm the Conservation District Forester for Clare and Gladwin County. And so I work with the Forestry Assistance Program. And so the goal of the Forestry Assistance Program is we help family forest landowners achieve their stewardship goals. There's 19 FAP foresters throughout the state, and we're available for free on-site technical assistance with tree planting, timber harvesting, wildlife habitat, forest health, all that type of good stuff. And so a really important part of managing your forest is that forest management plan. And that's something that we can kind of help you get started on. A big part of our job too is to provide referrals to the private sector. So we'll refer you to a either a consulting forester or industry forester that is available to write that management plan. And so your forester, they're gonna help you with coming up with the plan. They're gonna write and help you execute that management plan. That plan is gonna have a statement of your goals and objectives as a landowner. So that'll include some of the things that Georgia had just talked about. That plan is also gonna have an inventory of your resources. And that's not just gonna be like timber volumes and values. That'll also include your soils, any endangered species, wildlife, whether it be endangered or not endangered, things like that. And then the third component of a forest management plan is your schedule of activities. So that'll lay out for, I guess, whatever the length of time of the plan is. It'll say when your timber harvests are going to be and what's going to be harvested down to like the specific like acreage and areas. But it'll also have other scheduled activities such as, maybe next year you're going to put in some food plots. Maybe every 5 years you'll plant 5,000 trees. So things like that. Your management plan will be a pretty comprehensive document that's just going to guide your management activities for the future. And it's also going to tell you a lot about your woods, which can be really helpful as well. And hiring a forester to get a management plan done or having some type of written plan is a really important part of the management process because it can help you stay on track with what needs to be done and when, and it'll help you optimize your resources for your goals that you have for the property.
Super. So if there are any questions about that, having a management plan written, about how to go, go about talking to the Forestry Assistance Program forester, or how to be referred to a consulting forester, that feel free to ask those questions. I did have a couple. Yeah, cost. Yeah, so that's a really good question about the cost. So like Nia said, starting out by talking to a consulting or a conservation district forester, it doesn't cost you anything. And, but just like with any other sort of service by a consulting forester, it varies considerably, and it's really hard to say. I mean, Nia, do you have any other responses to that kind of question that you like to share?
Yeah, so I would say that, I guess kind of to echo your point of a great first step is working with your conservation district forester because we can offer services for free. And then if cost of the plan is an issue, there are also opportunities for cost share with the DNR's Forest Stewardship Program, as well as the USDA. They can offer cost share assistance as well. And a plan is required to enroll in certain programs, such as like the Qualified Forest Program that can provide a tax break. With QFP, most landowners find that within the first couple of years of being in the program, they've made up the cost of the plan in tax savings. But other programs like Tree Farm or MEEP, those are programs that you need a forest management plan for as well. So it's definitely, I would say, a worthwhile investment for your woodland.
Oh, yeah. So another question is, does every county have a conservation district forester? Yes, that's a challenge. Nia, do you have a response for that one?
Yeah, so unfortunately, not every county does. Most of the counties in like northern Michigan and the UP do. If you're in a county that is, I guess, bordered by one, sometimes we can kind of come over and assist. Otherwise, we're still happy to assist with like remotely. Like sometimes I'll remotely assist people in like Midland or Isabella County if I can't get out to their property. Otherwise, there are also going to be consulting foresters that would be available to still come out for like a site visit and give you advice and recommendations and things like that. If you go to michigan.gov/MIFAP, it'll show the map of all the areas covered by the Forestry Assistance Program, and it'll have the contact information to our offices.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so 46 counties are covered, which is very nice. Yeah, and I guess that is the benefit of our remote situations these days, is that people are getting a lot more adept at just being able to contact one of the conservation district foresters, even if it's not directly in that area. So, yeah. Yes, and any of the links or other electronic references that we talk about today will be shared with you after the presentation. So no worries if you're having troubles trying to keep track of all of those different links. Well, thank you, Nia. Yeah,
You're
Nia's
welcome.
going to be featured in one of the videos that we're going to be showing in a few minutes. So we'll see her again, at least via video. It's great.
Yeah, right on. Thanks for having me, Georgia.
Thank you. So I'm going to go back to the slides. So at any rate, this is where I wanted to break this up a little bit presentation wise and give you an idea of what harvests look like directly afterwards on the land. And I'm going to be featuring 3 different kinds of forests, and with the help of the consulting forester that helped on the property, he's going to guide us through some of this, as well as Nia Becker, who you just saw, who's also going to be talking about a different portion of this. It's the same plot of land, but it has different kind of forest type, and the different approaches that you would use to harvest those different kinds of forest types, and what it looks like after post-harvest. This particular piece of land is owned and managed by the Michigan Forest Association. And I wanted to start out with the first video being the former executive director of Michigan Forest Association, who helped to acquire the lands. And he's really good at being able to articulate the goals of MFA. So it would be just like a forest owner, being able to figure out what those goals are before doing any harvest, and just a history about the land that we're going to be featuring. So Renee, if I can have you pull up the one with Bill Body. Bill Body is one of the former executive directors of MFA.
This is one of 6 that we acquired several years ago. And as far back in history as we can go is probably around the 1950s. A fellow by the name of Fred Prince owned it. And Fred had a innate interest in forestry, although he didn't have any formal education in forestry. Fred owned this land and owned several other 40s. He deeded it all to a nonprofit called Forests for the Future. And Forests for the Future was headquartered at Harbor Springs. I was executive director of the MFA at the time, and I had a call from one of their board members who was an attorney, and he said that they were thinking that they should divest themselves of all of this land. They asked if we would be interested in acquiring some of those lands, and I answered that yes, of course we would. And they gave us a list of all the legal descriptions, and then we were to identify 4 of them. And I think there must have been 30 or 40 descriptions on that list. And we thought, well, we'll identify 5 just in case somebody else wants one of them. And this was one of the first ones that we identified. MFA was chosen as one of the possible recipients was our emphasis on forestry education. And they know that it was near and dear to Fred's heart, and it's something that Fred would approve. Fred was a member of MFA, I think a lifetime member. And so we know that Fred's interests are going to be fulfilled through the MFA's activities.
So that gives you an idea. I wanted to just review a couple of things that Bill Body said in there. And one of them was, well, first of all, it's really helpful to know the history of the property. If you are acquiring property, to know the history, what was there before, who owned it before, what their intent was, because it might help you to give you clues as to why you're seeing what you're seeing on the ground right now. And it also is very helpful when you're working with a consulting forester to be able to share that information with them. But the other thing is then, like Bill Body said, the main goal is to provide educational opportunities to anybody that's interested about how forested lands can be managed. So that is the goal of this property in particular. And so it's just to give you an overview, it's 40 acres of land, but it has 3 different forest types on it. And the 3 different forest types are, it's a red pine plantation, an aspen stand, and then a northern hardwood stand. And so those are the 3 different kinds of forest types that we're going to feature and what they look like post-harvest. These harvests had taken place just this past year, so it's very, very recent. Okay, and so I'd like to start then with Dean Reed, who is the consulting forester who helped to guide the management of this these harvests. And he's going to first talk about red pine.
We had a recent thinning on this side, taking and reducing the stocking level down so that we can over time thin it again. Probably in 10 years the stocking level was pretty high. I couldn't get it down to where ideally it should be without removing about 1/3 of the basal area or stocking level. The other side of the road was a little more open, and we decided we would use a seed tree cut, cutting it much heavier so that we could attempt to get natural regeneration. As a stand, you have to figure out eventually what you're going to do with your pine stands, whether you're going to start all over, try and get natural regeneration. Those are a couple of the options you can do. Okay, this got thinned down to about 170 square foot basal area. Ideally, after the second thinning, and this is only the second thinning, you want to take it down to about 120, the third thinning 150, and then on the 4th thinning you can actually let it, residual be up to 180.
Okay.
The crowns don't get as big as in, say, hardwood stands. I think most of the wood went as saw material to sawmill down here. Beer Lumber bought it. There was possibilities for utility poles in here. I don't know if they took any, and that's the highest value product that could have come out of here. Beer saws all their pine down to a 5-inch top, so it doesn't have to be big stuff. It can be even pulpwood size. This plantation was planted about 1950, so it's 70 years old. It got thinned about 45 years ago. Should have been thinned either at 25 or 30 years for the first thinning. The first thinning, normally you take out every 3rd row. That gives you your access road for your processor and your skidder. And then use that in the future too. Then you're only thinning trees on either side of the trail into the stand. This stand was not thinned that way, so it made it pretty difficult to thin it this time. You did have to open up spots, creating a little more open areas in it just to get a skidder through. This is planted on about a 7-foot by 7-foot spacing, which is pretty tight. It's recommended now, probably as tight you want to plant a red pine plantation is 8-foot by 7-foot with 8-foot between the rows, so that when that third row comes out, you have about 14-foot probably at least to get your processor down through. Equipment just seems to be getting bigger and bigger. You might get a little red pine in spots. It wouldn't amount to much. It's too thick, too dense. It just sort of sat there. We are getting hardwood regeneration that likes to come up under a shaded situation. We're getting beech, we're getting ash. There actually is some sugar maple in here. But both, and ironwood, that's another one deer don't like. So ironwood and beech will typically come in a lot of opened up stands. On the left, they had thinned that one heavier, and we decided because it was a fairly small area, we would seed tree cut it, open it up considerably, and see if we get some natural regeneration seeding in the open areas. We do have some hardwood that we're going to have to take down. We may have to do a little bit of scarification of the ground to get a seed bed as well. Well, then the other process would be to go in and hand plant it, but then you've got to worry about the taking off the red pine overstory not very many years after you got your red pine planted, or they would end up smashing it down. Another possibility in some cases is a stand like this. You can prescribe burn right under standing red pine and reduce some of the slash, create some bare spots that the seeds could seed into.
Thank you. So I think you've noticed Dean knows a lot about, obviously, about his work. Sometimes when we're out there, when foresters are out there, we don't notice all of the terminology that we use. And so we did try and offer some of those definitions of some of the things that he talked about in the video itself. And so things like scarification and basal area and seed tree, you know, all those sorts of things are terminology that foresters use a lot. And so I'd say when you're working with a forester, if you have any questions about any terms that they use, don't be afraid to ask. That is definitely smart, I think, to be able to ask those questions. One thing though is I wanted to point out the little seedlings, little sprouts you saw featured in the video itself are actually red pine seedlings that are coming up under the more open spaces in part of that harvest. So it took less than a year for some of those sprouts to take root and start to go. So I mean, it's really pretty exciting to see that kind of regrowth, regeneration so early on, right after the harvest. So if you notice, it was in bare soil. So that's when he was talking about scarification. It's making sure that the ground is open enough and bare enough to give enough warmth and sunlight for those seedlings to get established. So were there any other questions about the red pine stand before? Because next I'm going to move on to Nia Becker talking about the aspen stand, but I wanted to stop for a moment and see if there were any questions about the red pine.
No, as of right now, Georgia, there's nothing in there.
Okay, that's fine. Great, and if you think of something later, that's okay too, you know, no worries. So I'm going to go ahead and move on then to Nia Becker's feature on the aspen stand that's also located on the same piece of property.
So here we have some lovely aspen regeneration. Aspen is a early successional tree species, so that means it responds best to clear cutting. That's the best way to really get lots of regeneration like you see here all around me. Aspen is a relatively short-lived tree, meaning they don't live very long. Typically when they're anywhere from 35 to 50 years, they're going to be ready to be harvested again. They of course grow faster on good sites, sites with good soil. They'll grow a little slower on sites with poorer soil or really wet sites. Well, the more you cut, the better regeneration you'll get, but you can still leave some mature trees to provide a little bit of habitat diversity. Typically, the more trees you leave though, the less aspen you'll get, and you'll get more shade-tolerant trees or mid-tolerant of shade in competition. Right behind me, there's some red maples here, some cherry, some ironwood, and they can do a little better with some shade. So aspen has something called root suckers. What that means is they send their roots out pretty far from the tree, and those roots have buds on them. And when the soil warms, they'll start sprouting. And so usually this will happen maybe when you harvest trees, but since there's gonna be roots out in the middle of this road, that's why we see some of these aspens sprouting up. Obviously, since this is in a road, they're probably not going to survive much longer, but we appreciate its effort.
That's good. Yeah, so I think what Nia definitely wanted to be able to highlight with that is, in particular, how important it is to actually do clear cutting for a species like aspen that really needs a lot of light to be able to reestablish itself. And when you think of aspen, when you're clear cutting, it doesn't mean that you're killing the trees per se, because as she was pointing out, those roots have all of those little buds on them that shoot up after the mature aspen has been removed. So it's basically like giving aspen a haircut, and it comes back very quickly. It's quite amazing. I did see that we have one question about the transition from that red pine to hardwood and how that might be managed. And I wouldn't say it's necessarily anything special about managing it. I would say though that a lot of different wildlife appreciates that diversity. So that those transition areas really do promote a lot of wildlife diversity to go from one type of forest type to the other. So in particular, and I'm not a wildlife person, so forgive me if some of you out there are, but things like grouse really appreciate that thick aspen, but there might be other things about the red pine that they would like to spend time in as well, and certainly same with deer. So that's all I could probably say about that. Oh, that's a good question. So when clear cutting, do they completely remove all debris from the ground to make room for growing aspen? And what areas in Michigan do we do this clear cutting specifically for aspen? Good question. So the first one about removing all debris. Well, with aspen, a lot of times they do remove the whole tree, because it's usually, those tops are often used for pulpwood as well. So yes, you would need to do that in order to make sure that the aspen has enough sunlight to be able to reestablish itself. And yeah, aspen, I would say it's more prominent in, north of Clare, but there are places also that you can encourage aspen in the southern lower as well. So it depends mostly on the soil type and how much open space you have. So good questions. And so let's go ahead and move on to our final forest type that we have on this property, which is just in general terms called northern hardwoods. And Dean Reed's going to come back and talk about how that was harvested and what to expect for the future.
This part of the property was select cut. Trees were individually tree marked with a stump mark, so you could tell that the trees that needed to be cut got cut, and not extra trees got cut. This was a stand that wasn't in great quality. It had been high graded over time, the best logs taken out of it. But you can tell it's a quality stand in that there's ash and basswood mixed in with the hardwood is a good indicator. There'll be understory plants that would tell you that too. A lot of stems in here were doubles and triples. And normally you don't mark individuals out of clumps, but in this case I did. And the logger, because he used the machine, was able to cut really high stumps, but helped with the trees that were left having a little more room to grow. We have here a spot, what we call a regeneration hole. All the overstory trees were taken out. Ideally, if you come in and knock down the ironwood and beech, you could get sugar maple species coming in a hole like that. And because it's got full sunlight above it, that they would get started. And as the crowns close, the ones in the center would be the ones that become your future crop trees. They would be coming from seed. There's some really small ones, probably up to 6 inches right now coming in, seeding in. With high deer numbers, generally you'll see seedlings to about where the snow depth is. It's covered most of the winter, and not much above it because they'll browse on all the hardwood stems coming up, especially the maple, both soft maple and hard maple. They don't like beech or ironwood. Well, you see a lack of maple reproduction all over the stand. There really isn't any maple saplings even that should be in here, because it'll grow up under fairly heavy crown cover. The lack of it tells you we could probably look around and find something that's been chewed on severely. I don't see it here directly. This was a basswood stump, and sometimes elf sprout. We also had in this stand over there a little pocket of aspen and a bigger pocket up here, and that gives landowners an opportunity. If you got a high quality stand, you probably just take out your aspen and leave your hardwoods. Unless you're into deer hunting and grouse, you might, on a stand that's kind of poor quality, enlarge that aspen component area by cutting hardwoods farther out and making a little bigger patch clear cuts. And that's fully regenerated already basically, and there's an area up here that looks like it's fully regenerated as well.
Great. So yeah, as you can see, there was a lot going on with that. And a couple of the things that I wanted to highlight that Dean was talking about is how there were little seedling, sugar maple seedlings, but if you have high deer populations, those deer are going to keep that wiped out, and it's going to be very hard to recruit, as in keep those trees growing and becoming the next generation of trees. So deer populations I consider to be one of the biggest concerns that people have when we're talking about regenerating northern hardwood forests. And like he was saying, northern hardwoods is kind of a general term, but it usually consists of maple, beech, basswood, those sorts of trees. And the other thing that I thought was interesting that he was pointing out, he was sitting on a basswood stump. The basswoods are very adept at sprouting at the base of the stump. You saw those little sprouts around the base. So if you allow those to grow, they will sort of compete with each other, and that's where you get those multiple stems coming up. And basswood really likes to be able to regenerate that way. And that's a nice species to have as well. So there's a lot of opportunity for diversity in these kinds of forest stands. And it's up to the landowner to decide what they want to see in the future. And that's where the consulting forester can really help. So speaking of regeneration and the kinds of things you need to worry about, there are a couple of questions before we go on to that. Yeah, hinge cutting. Yeah, in forestry, there's a lot of debate about the value of hinge cutting. It's very frustrating. For those that don't know what that is, you're basically halfway cutting the tree so that it falls down, but it still retains enough cambium layer or a connection to the crown once it's down on the ground that it continues to grow. Personally, it bothers me because it feels like it's not the best use of a lot of trees out there, but that is an opportunity. Another question, in sensitive lowlands and riparian corridors, do the consulting foresters recommend leaving the slash in those areas as part of an overall timber harvest contract? You can definitely do that, and that is very helpful. And there are all kinds of guidelines, best management practices that reputable foresters and loggers use in those kinds of wet areas that if done improperly, you can leave a lot of rutting, compaction, erosion, all those horrible things. And so, yeah, definitely if you have more sensitive areas, there are ways to still be able to conduct harvests in a responsible manner, but it does take a lot of extra attention and guidance. And yeah, leaving the slash has a lot of other benefits, so it's good for different kinds of wildlife. There are studies about leaving slash around areas where you especially want to have regeneration, because it might actually deter deer from trying to get in there and munching on your seedlings and saplings. So a lot of good reasons sometimes for leaving that slash behind. Yeah, so there we go. More beneficial leaf piles. It depends, again, I hate to say that, it does depend on what you want, but if you want to encourage certain kinds of wildlife for shelter, coarse, they call it coarse and fine woody debris, very good for being able to maintain that forest floor health, reducing erosion in some cases, those sorts of things. There are some benefits for sure. I think I got all of the questions. Okay, so now I'm going to turn it over to what I consider to be the other really big concern about regeneration and keeping your forest healthy, and that's exotic invasive species. And so we have two fantastic experts that are part of the cooperative Cooperative Invasive Management Area System, sorry. And they're going to take it away for a while and give us some good overviews on some things to look out for in your own property.
Thank you so much, Georgia. My name is Katie Grishak, and I'm I should start sharing my screen so that you can see our names. That's a cool plan. Here we go. And I am the coordinator for the Northwest Michigan Invasive Species Network. And joining me today is Vicki Sawicki with the North Country Cooperative Invasive Species Management Area, or CISMA. Vicki, do you want to say hi? Say anything real quick?
Hello.
I'm going to be mostly talking, but Vicki's going to jump in. I'm sure I'll forget some stuff or something might be different. We all have a little bit of different stuff going on. So we thought it was important for both of us to be here. But I'll jump right in and talk a little bit, since it's, all about me right now. I'll just mention that the Northwest Michigan Invasive Species Network, we are a CISMA, even though we don't have the word CISMA in our name. We mostly go by ISN to be a little shorter as well. And all CISMAs are a cooperative group or a network or whatever you want to call it of bunches of partners who are working together to combat invasive species, whether that's through outreach or on the ground work or being there as a resource. We're there for all of those things. So those are some of ISN's major partners. Most of us are majority grant funded. The Michigan Invasive Species Grant Program is a big funder. And I think both Vicki and I also have funding from the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative through the U.S. Forest Service and the Good Neighbor Authority, which is a combination of Forest Service and DNR funding. So we're really lucky. There are lots of other possible funding sources for various CISMAs because there are a bunch of us. So there it is, all spelled out what a CISMA is, that we're collaborative partnerships. We have, boundaries of our own, but the whole point is that rather than folks focusing only on their properties, we're trying to work across boundaries against invasive species to prevent them and to treat them and to educate folks. So the awesome thing is that everywhere in Michigan has a CISMA, and you can find your CISMA at michiganinvasives.org. There's even like a little interactive map, so you can click on your county and it'll take you to your SISMA. We're all a little different. We have different geography. We have different goals. But we all work together, you know, with Vicki and I both being here. This isn't like the first time that this has ever happened. We all get together at least once a year, and then we also talk to each other on a more regular basis. Hey, I'm doing something over here, or have you made anything about this? So it's very much cooperative within ourselves and also between ourselves. And we consider ourselves really excellent resources for your invasive species questions of all types. So. Now that we've talked about SISMAs, I want to get into a little bit more about invasive species. But before we get on to doom and gloom, I want to talk about the positive parts. And the positive parts are a lot of what Dr. Peterson has been talking about today. The habitat matters. What are you passionate about with your property? That's what makes the invasive species management important. And so we with the Invasive Species Network have kind of a three-pronged approach. We say that habitat matters for people, whether it's someone, I like to go hiking, my husband likes to go biking, my brother is really big into bugs, and my dad loves nature photography. You know, whatever your thing is, there's a reason that habitat matters for you. Habitat matters for wildlife, whether you're a bird watcher or a hunter or an angler, any sort of outdoorsy thing, or even indoorsy looking at birds, you know, indoorsy looking at butterflies. That habitat is really important. There are a lot of really deep connections between native plants, native insects, and other wildlife that are really, really crucial to where we are in Michigan, in our beautiful state. And then we say that habitat matters, in particular, again, for me being in the Northwest Michigan region, in like the Grand Traverse region, it matters for our economy a whole lot. And I think that's true throughout Michigan. In Northwest Michigan in particular, it matters for our tourism. People come here to see our habitats. It matters for our agriculture, whether that's silviculture, harvesting of tree products, or for more traditional agriculture, thinking about the pollinators that are really important for our vineyards and orchards. And then also for fishing industries and all sorts of industries that are, you know, absolutely crucial throughout Michigan. We need those habitats to support the things that we want. So that's the happy fun part. That's the why we do this. But we are focusing on invasive species today. So the formal definition is a non-native species. So it must be not from the area that we're talking about. And then it must do harm to people, the environment, or the economy. And one of the things that's really important about invasive species beyond that harm is thinking about when you act on something. And in particular on this graph, I think about the left side of the graph, that introduction and detection side, when there's not that much of it. If you're able to act earlier, it's cheaper, it's easier, it's a lot lighter on your sanity. Whereas if you wait until you're more towards the right side of that graph, when there's a lot of it everywhere, that can be very expensive. It can be very exhausting, and it costs a lot more money. So as we're using grants that are, you know, coming from a lot of public funding sources, and as you are, you know, budgeting yourself, it's so much smarter to think about that prevention and detection than it is to wait until you have a bajillion acres of garlic mustard or autumn olive. You don't always get that choice, but when you can make that choice, it's really nice to work towards the left side of that graph. Also important to talk about is what's not invasive. What I have here are a couple different pictures. One is of a non-native, non-invasive species. So corn is not invading anywhere. We have to work really hard to keep it alive most places. So that's not invasive. And there are plenty of non-native, non-invasive species, lots and lots. But we also have lots of native species that people may find aggressive or something that they don't want. And that's totally fine. You know, managing your own property is great. Poison ivy, awesome in the forest. It feeds birds, it feeds insects. It's really amazing, but like you might not want it by your back deck. Horsetails are really cool. They're especially important for erosion control in wet areas. But if you're making a flower bed, they're just going to keep coming up. It's really frustrating. I get it. And then our wild grapes are absolutely beautiful and an incredible part of forest regeneration and forest pioneer species, but they can be a real problem for if you're trying to grow a really straight, pure lumber. They can kind of make trees go a little kinky. So, you know, making your own management decisions are fine, but they don't figure into the invasive species equation. So let's talk about some of the big bads. Garlic mustard is one that I think a lot of folks are familiar with now. And it is it's a small plant that it seems like it wouldn't cause a big problem, but it sure does, especially for forestry. It's a biennial, which means it lives for 2 years. And in the first year, it looks like this picture in the lower left, where it's just a little rosette, just little leaves. And then in the second year, it grows up tall, like in the picture right above that, and it will flower and seed. Each plant has a couple thousand seeds apiece, and those seeds can live in the soil for like 10 years easy. And so it's really, really a frustrating plant because not only does it really cover areas, I've had several pictures of it covering, just absolutely covering areas, but it also puts out chemicals into the soil through a process called allelopathy that stop other plants from growing. And this is a really big deal when we're thinking about seedling regeneration. After you've done a sustainable harvest and you want those seedlings to come in and take back over and grow into big trees, if you have garlic mustard growing underneath, it can really set things back by a number of years. And that's not the goal, of course. If you're sustainably managing for timber, you want to be able to keep harvesting timber. And if it's setting you back by 5 or more years, that can be pretty significant. It's also a problem deer don't eat it. Oh, what were you going to say, Vicki? Go ahead.
Well, I was going to mention about the deer, but I also wanted to mention something that comes to mind to me about garlic mustard is sometimes you can have an issue. A lot of times consulting foresters will only visit property in the winter because they're busy and they can do most of their job in their winter, but garlic mustard isn't something they're going to catch in the winter. I recently had a consulting forester who is a consulting forester for a school forest who called me because I had mentioned to the newspaper where our source population for garlic mustard is in our county here. And he was the consulting forester for that school forest, but had never seen the garlic mustard because he did all his visits in the winter. So if you hopefully can get your consulting forester to come, not just in the winter, to at least pay a visit in the spring, or otherwise you can call your local SISMA to potentially come and check that out.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I had not thought of that at all. These 2 species I have here are the ones that you're not going to be able to see year round. And so it's really important to be there during the growing season. The good news is that pulling can be super effective. But if you've got a lot of it, that can be a lot of work. You can also use herbicides. Foliar sprays work really well, and a lot of different herbicides are very effective. And so we recommend that you work with your local SISMA to figure out, or your conservation district. They may also have some good options. I also included in here Dame's Rocket, which has a similar lifestyle, similar concerns, and similar treatments to garlic mustard, but it does look a little different. It has longer leaves and it has those purple flowers. They can look like phlox, but phlox has the 5 petals and Dame's Rocket only has 4. And so it's really important to keep track of these things because they do really impact forest health. So pulling works, but you don't want to compost it. The seeds can live through traditional composting unless you do like really hardcore composting. And so you want to be keeping track of where you put that garlic mustard and yeah, keep track of it because it will spread. And this is what we really commonly see spreading after a harvest activity is because those seeds are so small and they're in treads. We'll talk more about prevention, but this is one that we see a lot up here. I didn't talk about ID, but it has those heart-shaped leaves with a wavy edge and it smells like garlic or like oniony kind of garlicky smell when you crush it. So keep an eye out for that. Sorry for these little random words on here. I promise it'll make sense as we go along, but I wanted to talk with you about our woody invasive species, which are something that you'll definitely or could encounter as well. First one, of course, is autumn olive. It doesn't necessarily often show up in deeper woodlands, but you do see it. All parts of this plant are covered with little silvery bronzy scales, including the fruits and the leaves and the flowers. This was really commonly planted and has now become a huge problem. I know Vicki and I both see absolutely tons of this everywhere, but it's definitely a problem throughout the state. And identifying it, those little silvery scales are really useful. And right now the plants are usually covered in these berries. It's a problem because it also changes the soil. It's a nitrogen fixer, which seems like it could be really good, but unfortunately that usually changes the soil and makes it easier for other invaders to get in. And it also does some allelopathic, putting chemicals out into the soil to stop other plants from growing, so it doesn't end up benefiting that much. And then nothing eats it other than the birds eating the berries. So it just isn't kept in check, and it's not a good part of the habitat. There aren't those bugs that feed the birds. Japanese barberry is an extremely common plant that's sold for garden use, and that's totally legal to be done. It has these little, it's called spatulate leaves because the leaves are kind of spoon shaped. And right around now, it has these bright red berries and tiny but mighty thorns at each little place each place that the leaves come off. It can be purple or green and purple or lime green or green. And those are all the same species, and it can just kind of morph. So if you have a purple one in your landscape, you may see green ones in the forest. These spread really aggressively. It changes the pH of the soil. And it also harbors at about 12 times the normal rate the black-legged tick that carries Lyme disease. So this is a human health concern as well. A really, really big issue. We have 2 species of buckthorn that are pretty common in our state. Common buckthorn is on the left. You can see its leaves look a little different. It has orange underbark. So if you take a knife and kind of scratch the bark, if it's orange underneath, that's a really good sign that it's common buckthorn. It is covered in dark glossy berries, and it has these kind of thick leathery leaves and shiny gray bark. Whereas glossy buckthorn on the right has these thinner, more papery leaves. It doesn't really have the orange underbark, but it does have all of those berries. It grows more in wet areas, whereas common buckthorn you see just about everywhere. These are a really big problem in wetlands, especially because not only do they do allelopathy on plants, but they actually, some of those chemicals that they put out into the soil cause huge problems for frogs, including birth defects and death. So yay, habitat matters. Black locust is a plant that was commonly planted in farmsteads as a hopeful source for fence posts because it is extremely rot resistant wood, but it can not only grow through seeds, which are very prolific, but also through root sprouts, so root suckers, where out in its roots, kind of like the quaking aspen that we saw earlier in the videos with Nia, those root sprouts can come up and make this plant really difficult to control, and it's very, very hard wood. It has thick kind of braided bark and these compound leaves that are rounded at the tips, which is how you can distinguish it from a lot of other species. Invasive bittersweet, we do have a Native American bittersweet, but there's also a bittersweet from Asia that they're very difficult to tell apart, and they do hybridize. So it can be a real tricky one. This is a vine and causes all the problems of grapevines, making trees go twisted with some added excitement of also hurting the trees, possibly even smothering the trees, and also not feeding the birds, unlike the grapevines. What were you going to say, Vicki?
Well, I just want to say that I personally think that Oriental bittersweet is probably one of the biggest threats of any of these to a forest. I've been in areas of forest where these vines grow to be 8 inches in diameter, girdle over top the trees, and they actually will kill huge areas of forest that then will just be torn down in wind events. So when I go into a site that has Oriental bittersweet, and if it had all these other species as well, I would prioritize the first thing you do is get rid of the Oriental bittersweet.
Yeah, especially with forestry management, I would totally agree with that. And absolutely, some of our techs were out last week and they were sawing through bittersweet that was this big around. So it's pretty serious business. We have several species of invasive honeysuckles, and they can have a huge variety of leaf shapes. So I'm not going to get too crazy about honeysuckle leaf shape. But we do have native honeysuckles as well, 3 or 5 species, which are really cool. They're mostly in the north, mostly in the UP. They're not super common. But you can always tell an invasive honeysuckle because it has a hollow stem. And you can see it on the larger stems, but it's actually easier if you can get a good clean cut. It's easier to see on a smaller stem, interestingly enough. They do have really lovely flowers and fruits, which is one of the reasons that they have been planted and still are. But they, again, don't feed the insects. Some of the species are allelopathic, again, poisoning other species, and they really take over. They're very physical bullies in a forest, for sure. Relatively shade tolerant, just like the buckthorns, which are very, very shade tolerant. Tree of Heaven is one that is a little different because it is a tree, but it is a huge deal, especially as we're thinking in Vicky's in my region with our orchards and vineyards, because Tree of Heaven is not only a noxious invasive in its own right, doing allelopathy, spreading by both seeds and suckers, and just being a huge bully. It's very, very, very fast growing, but a soft, gross wood, and it smells like rotten peanut butter. So like 0 out of 10. This is a really frustrating plant. But it's also the host that the spotted lanternfly, which is another invasive species, spotted lanternfly needs this tree to complete its life cycle. And so it's really crucial whenever possible to get rid of this tree. Norway maple is one that I see more downstate than up north as far as in the forests, but it is easily confused with sugar maple, and again, very commonly sold in landscape use. There are lots of ways to tell Norway maple apart from sugar maple, but one of the easiest ways is it is way more likely to get this black tar spot fungus infestation. Sugar maples can get it too, but Norway maples get a lot of it. They also have leaves that are wider, and they have a milky bitter sap instead of a sweet, sugary, clear sap. Their fruits are different, their leaves are different, they got all sorts of other things, but those are some quick, easy identifications. And it really does, it grows a little faster, it has a little weaker wood, and just kind of a frustrating species for sure. And then finally, Scots pine has been really commonly planted for forest, like logging uses, because it is very fast growing. But unfortunately, it is also very great at putting out seeds and taking over other pines. So if you have a beautiful red pine plantation, or you're growing white pines and amongst your northern hardwoods or what have you, these Scots pines are really able to take over. The best way to identify them is their orange bark. About halfway up the tree, suddenly the grayish bark will turn orange, and on a lot of the branches you'll see this kind of orange color. So that's just a really quick and easy way to identify them. So you can see we have a lot of species, and I know I kind of blew through them, but I do encourage you to reach out to your local SYSMA to get the best information. But of course, also Vicky and I, if you aren't sure about your local SYSMA, you can reach out to us. We can help you connect, and we can also answer some questions. So I told you about all the bad guys. Now I'm going to tell you how to deal with them. You have a lot of options. Physical removal, so whether that's cutting or digging or pulling, is really great for small populations and young plants on these woody species. You have a couple different options. You can yank it out with a tractor if you've got it. You can dig it out with a shovel. ISN and North Country SYSMA, and I think several other SYSMAs, also have some variation. ISN has a puller bear, but there's also Weed Wrench, an Uprooter, a bunch of different brands. They all do the same thing. They clamp around the stem of the plant and pull it out. And I have a video of that in a minute. But you can also just cut them really low to the ground and keep cutting them. The stump will resprout in a lot of these cases. So it's definitely an active management, something you're going to have to keep doing. But if you don't want to use herbicides, that's a valid way to manage. There's also been some discussion about buckthorn baggies, which are like a really heavy plastic that you can put over stumps. And they can be really effective, but you also have to do them just right, or it doesn't really do anything. You have to get it all the way around, all the way down to the ground and cinch tight. Otherwise they'll just, the root collar sprouts will just go around the plastic bag. Something to keep in mind is the possibility of spread. You can pull any time of year, but do keep an eye if you're pulling a plant and it has fruits on it, and you're going to drag it somewhere, you're going to want to keep an eye on where those fruits may end up. So, just something to keep in mind is where do those fruits end up? So here I have a video. There's no sound, so don't be worried if you can't hear the sound, but this is a video of using our puller bear. And you can see we have our sandy soils, so we bring a board along to help give them a place to pivot, but those jaws get around the base and then just give you a really great lever action. It really is a back saver. I've had older people out with me during work bees, and they were able to pull out really big autumn olive with these Puller bears, or whatever brand. They're all really good. It's fine. And so again, different SYSMAs will rent these out or allow a loan of some kind to different folks if you would like to use them. It can be a great option. However, sometimes that is not the way you want to go. There's way too much, or they're too big, or you are just not able to, you want to do the cutting, but you just can't keep coming back. And so that's when we recommend a treatment called cut stump. And that is kind of what it sounds like. You cut it down and you put herbicide on the stump. We really recommend this because of its low risk. You know, you get to use herbicide to make your treatments more effective, but you're not using very much herbicide, and it's just going where you put it. There's very low risk of any drift or off target, and it just is a lot lower risk than any other kind of herbicide work. You only have to put the herbicide on the living part of the stump. So on a small stump, like in that little conglomerate picture there, there's a small one, and it's the whole thing is blue. Blue being the tracer dye so that you can see where you've put the herbicide. But if it's a larger stump, you just have to put it around the edge. And Vicki, what are you up to?
Yeah, I'm sorry. And this might be something you're going to address still, but I just want to mention that these techniques, while they're useful on most of these species, they are kind of species specific as well. So for instance, you cannot, to my knowledge, and there is a chemical I plan on experimenting with, but nothing I've used so far will you work as a cut stump effectively on Tree of Heaven and without you having
right
suckers coming off the roots. That can really be relentless. And also with Oriental Bittersweet is another one. If they're really new, grown from seed, you can pull them, but if they're more established, a big infestation, you have extensive roots and you're going to get a lot of suckers off of those roots, and it can actually cause them to spread. So I would just recommend that while it's good to know these methods, call your local SYSMA or your MSU extension office and just double check that the species you're fighting is going to be susceptible to this.
Yeah, absolutely. I had that in a previous slide, but I didn't say it. So thank you for bringing that up, that black locust and Tree of Heaven in particular require different methods. And we'll get to those, and I'll make sure I mention those species specifically in that slide. I've had pretty good success with Oriental Bittersweet, but it's also a matter of making sure you get all of it. So that can sometimes be a frustrating thing. For herbicides, there are two main herbicides that ISN suggests. Triclopyr, which can be sold as Garlan or Vastlan or a bunch of other, I tell you the active ingredients because there's a lot of different species out there, or a lot of different, herbicides out there. And I really recommend that you talk with your local SYSMA. They can help you read labels because labels are really jargony and full of nonsense. But anyway, Triclopyr is nice because it doesn't kill the grasses nearby. Glyphosate also can work, but it will kill grasses. And so those are just kind of things that you may want to weigh. Also making sure, well, we'll get to herbicides more later, but those are two herbicides that you can use. You can do this cut stump in any time of year except spring. So between bud break, when the buds break and the leaves start coming out, up until it's really hardened off, turned into like having its adult leaves. That's the point where you don't want to do cut stump, but all of the rest of the year you can, including in winter. You just have to use an herbicide that won't freeze, an oil-based herbicide rather than a water-based herbicide. So again, working with your local SYSMA to find out what is right for you is great. Again, we are cutting off the tops and probably dragging them somewhere. So do keep in mind if there are fruits on those tops, maybe piling them all in one spot so that you can keep a watch on that. Or you can chip them, you can burn them. There are lots of options, but just keep in mind those fruits. So here is the cut stump. You can use a chainsaw, a brush saw, a hand saw, loppers, nippers, your choice. But here's a fun video of my friend Audrey cutting a huge autumn olive, well, not huge, a medium-sized autumn olive. So you can cut it as low to the ground as you can. And then to apply the herbicide, we have a very fancy spongy thing. You can use a paintbrush. You can use a spray bottle. Anything that works for you is a-okay. Just make sure you're protecting yourself. And you can see that they just go around the edge and put the herbicide right on there. There's very low risk to getting that anywhere else. Even if you're using a hand spray bottle, you don't need to pump it up and spray it everywhere. You just have to spray a little bit onto the stump. So it's pretty fun. The important thing about cut stump though, is if you're cutting and using a brush saw or a chainsaw or lock, anything, and you have a cut and then you don't cut all the way through and you cut through higher up, but there's a wound lower on the stump, you need to treat that wound as well. You can't just treat the top because the wound means that there's different tissues that need to be exposed to that herbicide. So do keep that in mind if you have not clean cuts, that you need to hit those cuts as well. You can also do a foliar spray, which is kind of what you think of a more normal herbicide application. We really only recommend this for smaller, younger plants because it does have a much greater risk for off-target effects, drift, and hurting other plants. That said, you know, when you've got a million little babies, it can be a huge time saver to just go out and those little ones rather than trying to dig them all out when you've got a huge field. Again, similar herbicides for the cut stump and anytime in the growing season for the most part. Again, you may want to consider timing. If there are fruits and birds, herbicides are generally speaking not known to be harmful to birds because they usually work on amino acids that we as vertebrates don't have, but caution is always recommended. So if you can do it at a time when there aren't fruits, that's really ideal. And similarly, thinking about our pollinators, again, herbicides that we're suggesting are not known to have any harm to insects, but it's pretty cool to not spray the pollinators while you're spraying. So keeping all of that in mind when you're choosing your timing. So here's our little video of doing some spray. We like to say that you just have to spray to wet. You don't need it to drip off the plant and you don't need to get every single leaf. You'll see here that Audrey sprays, you know, a good portion of the plant, but there's some leaves there that don't have herbicide on them. And that's okay because she got that good spray to wet on spray to wet, spraying until the plant is wet on most of the plant. And that's going to be just fine. The final method I have here is the one that we recommend for taller trees and shrubs, but especially for those trees and shrubs that do that root suckering. So the tree of heaven and the black locust, this is the main suggested treatment for them. So it's kind of similar to a cut stump, except instead of, it's not really similar to cut stump. I don't know why I said that. But what you do is you cut into the bark at a shallow angle, several places around the trunk. You don't want to completely girdle or cut through the bark on the whole way around. And then you spray herbicide into those cuts. You want to expose the living tissue, the phloem, or I forget what the other term is. But anyway, that cambium, there we go. You want to expose that green wood and spray herbicide on it, because that is what's going to take the herbicide down into the roots and up into the leaves, but most importantly, down into the roots to kill out that whole clonal structure. There are some really specific timing and guidelines for Tree of Heaven in particular. You want to leave the herbicide on for 30 days before. There's a specific time window that's best. So again, working with your local SYSMA to get those exact details is really highly recommended. But again, similar herbicides, triclopyr, glyphosate are really good. There are others as well, but these are the lowest risk for both environment and human health. I don't have a video of Hack and Squirt, but yeah, Vicki.
Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to say what we use for Tree of Heaven, and I don't know, maybe Hack and Squirt is effective as well, but we use a basil bark, which is crazy effective and so much easier. You just spray a ring, and from that ring, about 18 inches above the ground, from that ring and down to the ground, triclopyr. And if you do that on Tree of Heaven in the hottest part of the summer, I've seen it kill giant trees, one and done, and no suckering. So
great. Yeah. And so then the nice thing about that is you don't have to use a sharp tool because you're just spraying it directly on the bark. Yeah, it can have a little more impacts on nearby species because you're spraying a little bit, like, I mean, you're able to put your sprayer right down there. So it's still pretty low risk, but it does have, it's a little bit more. Again, thinking about winter formulations, if for black locust, that's appropriate. For tree of heaven, it's not. But just, you know, keeping in mind, working with your local SISMA, you could work it out. So yeah, I'm sorry I didn't have a basil bark slide. That would have been a good one. But yeah, basil bark is another good one.
Katie, I just want to give you an update. You have about 10 minutes left till the end of the program.
Okay, great, thanks. One more thing to go is herbicide safety. Herbicide labels are legal documents. You need to read and follow them. Make sure you're protecting yourself, make sure you're protecting the environment, wear personal protective equipment, take a shower when you're done, store stuff safely, label stuff. It's super important. Just a couple of other species. I'm not going to try and teach these to you, but the great thing about invasive species is that there's always more of them, and they can have really big impacts on forests. So these are species that we don't have a lot of in Michigan yet, but we really want to prevent them from escaping into our woodlands. There are also a lot of forest pests that can be a big deal. And again, your SISMA or your local FAP forester can be a really great use of that, use for helping to identify them. And in particular, oak wilt and hemlock woolly adelgid are key species in Michigan right now that we are trying to prevent the spread of. They are already here, but we're trying to keep them in line. The other thing I wanted to talk about was earthworms. We had an ice age that exterminated or extirpated them from Michigan long time ago. And they don't move real fast, but humans moved them. They're great for gardens, but they're really, really terrible for forests, particularly when we're thinking about regeneration. They really decrease that regeneration that's able to happen, as well as a lot of other habitat facts. But if we're just thinking about straight cash, earthworms are actually a problem. So all of those invasive species mean that decontamination is absolutely key. And even just doing a little bit can actually make a huge difference. So on your boots, using a boot brush, whether it's like one of those hoof pick ones so you can really get in there, or scrubbing them off on a boot brush station, really, really key. And again, that'll help with if you were gardening and there were earthworms there and you go to a forest and there's no earthworms there, you don't want to move them around. Garlic mustard seeds, just pulling spare leaf matter off of vehicles is really important. And then for equipment, scrubbing it off or using pressurized air in a broom can make a huge difference. And this is something that you can require any logger who's working on your property to do as a part of their contract with you. Remember that they're working for you, and so you can make that requirement. This is important for before and after they're coming onto your land. And remember, it is your land, so you get to make those demands, I guess, and follow them yourselves. So, you know, just thinking about all the different places on a vehicle that stuff could get caught. You can also do some ID and reporting. You can just tell your SISMA, or the Midwest Invasive Species Information Network allows for reporting on your phone or your computer. And it also has some really great training, so you can get better at IDing these species. And you can also look at maps and see like what has already been reported in my area. What might I be looking for? And so this is my last slide, a list of resources that I talked about, and these will be emailed out to you, so you don't need to scribble them all down, and as well as Vicky's and my contact information.
Super. And we do have a couple of questions that I think, yeah, earthworms. I think it would be a good idea sometime to have a whole session on the earthworm thing, because that's a relatively new concept for people. But I'll turn back to that in a second. But one of the questions that got asked is, how do you get rid of autumn olive? Does it have a high recurrence rate? I think maybe you've covered that quite a bit about, you know, those options. I agree. Being able to pull them out is really helpful if you can manage to do that. But I think you covered that pretty well.
Yeah, it depends too on like all of these species can have a seed bank, a lot of seeds in the soil. And so if they've been there a long time, they'll regenerate a lot, versus if you get them early, you know, you might be almost one and done. So
good point. Yeah. And then where do you usually see black locust trees in Michigan?
Usually on farmsteads, again, because it was often planted in areas for future use, either as a living fence or for use in fences. So up here in Northwest Michigan, I see them on a lot of our like centennial farms or things that were formerly farms. And then also just other places people planted them. But they were always planted by people, at least to start.
Yeah.
Sorry
yeah.
to backtrack, but this is Vicky about autumn olive. One thing I would consider is to do, sometimes it's a good idea to do your control before your harvest. So I've particularly, and you wouldn't think have seen this as an issue in aspen stands where they've clear cut without dealing with the autumn olive that was there, and they clear cut around the autumn olive. So now you've released all that autumn olive, and it's kind of amazing that it can grow a lot bigger and quicker than your aspen. So sometimes just keep in mind what's there before you harvest, because once you open it up, it's going to grow like mad.
Yeah, good points. Yeah, and so again, how do earthworms negatively affect forests? Oh my goodness, we can go over that. The mechanism, there's so many, but I think you kind of covered that quite a bit. The main thing is earthworms are very effective at reducing the duff layer in forests, and a lot of times that reduces the moisture levels available to seedlings to be able to establish themselves. There's a lot of churn, so those earthworms are really good at taking that duff, all of those fallen leaves and so on, and taking that organic material down and causing it to break down in a way that reduces its availability to plants for regeneration purposes. That's my understanding anyway.
Yeah, a lot of our forest species depend on that duff layer, basically, like the long and short of it is, whether it's a bird or a tree. And so not having that duff, that dead leaf litter, really impacts forests very negatively.
Yeah, so that's a real concern. Oh, and so there is a question. I see invasives in other people's lawns when just driving around. Is that something I should report?
Always. More data is great for us. Even if those people don't do anything, it can help us SYSMAs make science-based decisions about what to do when we're doing on-the-ground management. And it gives all of us more data about what is where. So yes, please. Awesome.
Yeah, and nobody's going to come to that person's door, knock on the door or anything like that. It's not that specific.
I mean, if it's a really high priority species, we might.
Well, that's true.
Say, Vicky said that you have this plant. We're going to say, hey, we heard that you might have this plant. We'd love, no one can force anyone to do anything with any species on their property in Michigan. So,
yeah, especially for things like Japanese knotweed. I don't know if that was one of them that was covered, but that's, some of them can really be damaging to a person's home. So it might be helpful to have an expert approach them and just say, hey, you might want to get rid of that. And here's how. So, cows rubbing on black locust tree bark for insect repellent. Oh, planted in or near lounge areas. Huh. I did not know that. Interesting. One more question. How can I keep an aspen from returning? It has taken over my lawn after being cut for other trees to come up.
Well, aspens are native. So technically speaking, I don't know because I focus on invasive species. Even though they can be aggressive, they are native, so they're not invasive. But I think that probably control would be relatively similar to a tree of heaven or black locust because they do that same root sucker sprouting. And so either the hack and squirt or the basal bark application of herbicide would probably be your best bet. But again, I don't know, they're native.
Well, thank you very much, Katie and Vicky. I really appreciate your going over these things. It does seem depressing at times, but there are things you can do. And we all work together. Hopefully we can at least keep these sorts of things under control. And we're running past time, and I apologize for that, but I did have one final slide that I wanted to be able to show just to, let's see, so let's stop sharing that screen, see if I can get the right one this time on the first shot, maybe not, but. Okay, so is this the notes page, guys, or is this the the correct one? Okay, I need to get to the end though. Oh dear. I'm just gonna, sorry. I had one final slide, and that was just to show if people are interested in trying to find a consulting forester, where do you go to find out who's out there? And and again, we'll provide all these links later to all of you, but there is a central place to find those forestry assistance program foresters out of the conservation districts. And there is a list. So there are different ways you can find consulting foresters. You can look in the Yellow Pages or online, just Googling it for somebody that would cover your area. There is a list of what they call registered foresters in Michigan. These are foresters who have met certain minimum qualifications to be called a forester, and are practitioners in good standing. So it's a list that's kept by the state of Michigan Department of Natural Resources. And so that list is available and shows who covers which counties. But that's not everybody. A good forester may or may not be registered on that list. So looking for those that have certain credentials, if they're with the Society of American Foresters as a certified forester, that again means that they've met certain minimum educational requirements and experience requirements and have continuing education. There's an association of consulting foresters, so if they're on that list, they're certainly well versed in the kinds of recent and important practices to help you with your land. So keep an eye open, and if you have further questions, I'll be happy to answer them later on. And I want to thank my assistants. Craig M. was the one that helped produce most of the videos. Renee Lutoski was the one that helped me to stay on track here with the slides, and Betsy Braid to have my back for all the other things at MSU. And Justin Whitmore helped with advertising and outreach. So I just want to thank my colleagues at MSU that really helped me out with this presentation. So thank you very much for joining us today. And I think I'll turn it over to Renee. Yes.